Hi everybody, and welcome to 50 Shades of Triangle, or Trikonasana, whatever you want to call it. This course is not just about Trikonasana, but what this course is about are all the different shades of gray that come with a pose. I want to go over alignment and how alignment is actually a personal thing. It's not a cookie cutter thing. When you're first getting into any sort of yoga practice, I think a lot of teachers have a tendency to make the lines very black and white, right? If you're learning how to color within a coloring book, you have the black outline so you know where to stay. But once you've kind of gotten a feel for your own practice and your own body, you know, it's important to find your own internal alignment and to trust that alignment, because there are different degrees at which you can exercise an asana and still be in correct form. Your hips don't necessarily have to be square all the time. You know, the knee doesn't always have to be over the heel. You know, there are certain things that we can adjust to for your own body, for your own constitution, your own anatomical makeup. But also it's really important to move out of the mind space of thinking about a pose in terms of what it's supposed to look like, and instead to move into a space of asking yourself, what do I want to get out of it? Because once you start asking yourself, what do I want to get out of this position, everything opens up for you, okay? And you're going to move outside of those black and white lines into the gray. So today we're going to go over some basic poses, right? For examples that you can utilize to help get your mind into a space of thinking about how you can move into what you need when you practice and move away from how it's supposed to look when you practice. So I hope you enjoy it. There's absolutely no prerequisites to this. In fact, if you're a total beginner, this might be great, because then you don't even get into the bad habits to begin with. But either way, there are no prerequisites. All we're going to talk about is some basic principles that you want to look out for, and then how to find the space you need in between point A and point B in any given position, all right? So again, I hope you enjoy it, and let's get started. Hi everybody. All right, let's jump into Trikonasana, or triangle pose. So I want to point out that obviously different schools of yoga have different ways of doing triangle. None are right, none are wrong, they're all right, they're all wrong, okay, right? It just depends on what you need. So if I were to give a demonstration of different forms of Trikonasana, right, I could do a really wide stance, okay? I could take my hand inside the foot, outside the foot, onto the leg. I could grab the toe, right? Even from here, I could focus on bringing the hip back, this hip forward, open my heart, close my heart. Like, there's so many different variations. When I teach this to Ashtanga students, I have them take a narrow stance for the purpose of their bandhas, move into the toe, because Ashtangis catch the toe, and we go for length of the spine and heart opening, right? So you could start back here where the hips are really far back, or you could pull the front body forward, right, and lean into it with your heart. So there's no right, there's no wrong, and that's really the point of this course, is to show you. So let's talk about the foundation first. What do you really want to achieve in this pose, okay? Do you want to go for hip opening? Do you want to go for lengthening the legs? Do you want to go for opening the heart? Do you want to go for creating space in between the vertebrae? You got to ask yourself these questions, so that way when you come into the pose, you know how to find what you need, okay? So if I were to be a total beginner, okay, and I'm really new to this pose, the first thing I probably would think about going for is just stability and balance, right? Because in the beginning, anything is challenging. Our mind and our body haven't quite made the connections yet. So to do the whole thing at once can be a little overwhelming. So you always want to work from the base, right? If you have no base, if you have no foundation, then you can't really focus on the more, the higher level stuff because you're just struggling to balance and stay in it. So let's remove the struggle a little bit and let's just focus on being in it. Let's find our feet, let's find our legs, okay? So for some of you, wide stance might actually be really hard because you're limiting yourself in your ability to hold that position. Maybe wide stance is easy for you. Maybe that's easier, okay? I find wider stances harder because to find my midline, it's just more difficult. I have to work harder from the side bodies pulling it in. But maybe you want to just go for a nice length in the legs. So go for a wide stance in the legs, not a problem. But if you get into it and you feel wobbly, well, maybe you need to shorten your stance again. Now, a big thing that comes up a lot, heel to arch, heel to heel, you tell me. I don't really care. I'm looking for how to grow a student in the asana. I'm not looking for those details. Just step. Wherever you land is fine, okay? From here then, you're finding your foundation, you find a little balance. If you have it, then you move further, okay? A lot of people get tight here, right? They can't go all the way down without totally compromising. Now, then you have to ask yourself, do I want to make that compromise or not? So you might say, you know, I think I just want to work on my lower body for now, until it's a little bit more stable and I'm not out of breath doing the position. So we take our hand where it's comfortable and we hang out here until the body starts to soften and we feel more stable, okay? But let's say we've moved on past that point and now we want to actually find a little bit more. So we might challenge ourselves, right, to find the floor. Well, again, it might actually be a challenge to catch the floor or the toe or whatever. So maybe we get a block, right? Like I'm certainly not against props if we're just trying to find, you know, our connection to the asana. So maybe we get a block. But why are we doing it? We're not doing it so we can find perfection in the pose. We're doing it so we can find length, space, stability, rooting, lifting, engaging. We want to find the connections to our body, not perfection in the pose, okay? So let's say we come down here. We're pretty good at the ankle, okay? Our hips are a little tight, our hamstrings are a little tight. Maybe we bend the hamstrings, okay? Because we're trying to find more stability and length at the same time. So we work here. But maybe we're not quite ready to take the head up because holding the head in that position takes a certain degree of strength. So we look down for a while and maybe we just take the arm up, right? Again, baby steps. We're going to work where we're at to get what we need in any given moment. So that's the first little bit. We're going to continue to dive into Trikonasana and explore all 50 shades of gray because there's definitely a lot to explore just Trikonasana alone. All right? All right, so I got a block for you guys to watch the block preparation that you can do, or, you know, modification, if you want to call it that, right? So we're in Trikonasana, and again, I am not so concerned about the alignment. I'm concerned about getting what you need. And from my perspective, anything that's rooted to the floor is always going to be your root. Well, I just said root, but it's always going to be where you find your foundation and you get your lift, you get your length from. So if we're not stable, we can't focus on lifting, we can't focus on lengthening, okay? So that's why stability is always first in a pose, okay? But let's say we found that, all right? Now, if you're really tight, you might, like I said, you might put the hand down on the leg. But a better option, to tell you the truth, would actually be to take this block, either inside or outside the foot, right, here or here, and to then push through. And the reason I say that, and not even with fingertips, but with a flat hand, is so you can focus on pushing away. If you can push away, you'll find length coming through the body. If I'm leaning into it here, I can't lengthen out of it, okay? Right? If I'm only focused on keeping stable, I can't focus on length. Stability needs to be there just on its own comfortably. Then we push through the floor with our feet and with our hand to find that length, okay? And we can then make a choice where we want to take that length. Do I want to take it along the body and the hips back? Do I want to take it along the heart and the head this way, right? Do I want to take the spine that way? But now we have options. We have something to move against to give us length, okay? So you might want to start with the block here. You could take it inside. You could take the block lower if you're prepared to go lower, okay? Even if you're an advanced practitioner and you go to catch the toe, you're going to securely hook that toe and use it to pull in and up, okay? No hanging out. We're trying to find, a deepening of our practice every time we move through it. If you come from this school where you do want to do wide stance, right, you're more comfortable with that, then you can do that. It's going to be a little bit more challenging, but it's your practice, okay? So just remember that you want to be comfortable in your stability and where you can push through the floor easily, and then move into where you want to take the lift and the length, okay? Now, let's say that, those few pieces are in line, right? We're stable. We can move down. And now, I'll just use the block for visuals. I can push through and I'm comfortable. Now, we've given ourselves that choice. Where are we going to take it, right? So a lot of teachers will say, well, the hip needs to be totally, pulling under the back body. Or some teachers will say, no, you need to lengthen out this thigh. Well, what do you want? What do you want to get out of the pose, right? Again, stop going for what it's supposed to look like. What do you want to find in your body? What do you want to feel in your body? What do you want to strengthen in your body? What do you want to lengthen in your body? Because now you have a choice, right? You're not stuck anymore with this idea of it has to look a certain way. I'm in it, great, I caught the toe, good, can barely breathe. Drop all of those assumptions and come from a place of stability and, finding that length. So we're stable. Now I'm very flexible, right? So I can choose from day to day where I want to take that length. Sometimes I actually want to take it in the back leg. I want to feel this hip stretch back here. So I'm going to really focus on drawing that right leg back, right? This hip comes more forward, okay? I don't have quite as much of a heart opening, but I'm getting the back of the leg open more. Other times it's a lot different. I pull this hip open, right? And then I utilize that to open the heart. And then more often than not, I like to extend. So I'll take the hips and pull them this way. And then I'll take my head and pull it that way. So I'm really getting traction in the spine, okay? And that's super advanced. But it's also where you want to grow to, right? Your practice, your body, your choice on how you want to, experience the asana, okay? So there's all different kinds of ways to do Trikonasana. No one way is wrong, okay? The gaze would always be the last thing to be in place, okay? Stability, length, and then the gaze. Because if you're not comfortable in the pose, if you're not breathing efficiently, then you need to back up, okay? So you need to find that space that says, okay, I'm good here. I'm not going to fall over and I'm not struggling to maintain my balance. And I can actually get a little something out of it. But we don't want to push ourselves so far that we've compromised our breath, because then we're no longer doing yoga. And we want to stay focused on the moment, focused on the breath, in the body, in the experience. So make sure that you work from those positions. Floor up, balance, stability, length, And then, if all of those pieces are in alignment, you'll focus on your gaze. But never compromise a pose for the gaze. Never compromise a pose for the appearance. Never compromise a pose, for a certain alignment cue. Always honor your body and go with what feels appropriate for you in that moment and the experience that you want to get, all right? Have the freedom for yourself to go after those things and to take ownership of your practice, and you'll find a lot more enjoyment and a lot more independence in it as well, all right? So we're going to move on to different poses now to talk about some of the different variations and different ways that you can explore asanas and have fun with those. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Warrior 1, and we're going to move on to Warrior 2. Virabhadrasana A and B, otherwise known. So we're going to talk about these poses and how a lot of teachers tend to rip them apart as well because of their own schools of alignment principles, okay? So some of the basic things that people see a lot of times in Warrior 1 would be the hips facing forward, right? This hip has to face forward. Well, that's kind of hard to do unless you're super open, right? Like in order for me to move my hip forward, now my heel gets compromised in the back here, right? It's harder for me to keep that heel down. I'd be more concerned about keeping your heels down. Work from the ground up, okay? So, a lot of the other cues I hear are like never send your knee past your ankle. And you want to kind of have this perfect like symmetry on both sides, okay? Where this hip is going this way, yeah? So this would be like your ideal Warrior 2, right, for most schools. But here's the thing, right? Like my heel, in order to do that perfect hips going forward, was much harder to keep on the floor. I don't want you to have to work against yourself. Like work with your body, okay? So maybe you take that foot in, okay, and you don't worry about your hips so much. You just find the floor, push down, lift up. Now, again, a lot of schools might go really low, right? You're really spreading that back leg. And if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. That's not a problem. Maybe you want to open those hip flexors, okay? And you want to find a good stretch here. Totally fine. But maybe that's a struggle for you. And you're thinking, I'm only doing Warrior 2 if I do it, or Warrior 1 if I do it this way. But that's not true, right? You can actually do this position if you are more narrow too. So that you could actually be here or here, right, and still be in position. I understand that a lot of schools do have these strict rules. But like even just doing that for me, and I'm very flexible, kind of puts a strain on my hip. And I don't like to strain my body. Like I don't need to strain it, okay? I tend to honor my body. So maybe instead of going really wide and having this perfect 90-degree angle here, right, and really focusing in on shoulders and hips square, we just kind of go where the body wants to go, right? We find that stability again in our own constitution, our own body, our own physique, and then move from there. Like, if I want to work my quadricep, I actually have to take a more narrow stance and move that knee past 90 degrees. And it's safe. I know a lot of schools will tell you it's not safe. It actually is safe. You push through the heel, right? Pull up, draw up from the earth, and send the knee forward. And now I am working my quadricep drastically. Like that is an intense workout to take it really far past the ankle. Now, if I'm not strong enough and I just want to find stability, this might be all I can do, right? It's really not even, it's nowhere near 90 degrees, right? It might not even resemble Warrior 1 or Warrior 2, but we're stable, we're comfortable, and we can breathe, okay? Never sacrifice your breath. And then little by little by little, we find something else. We don't have to go wide. You can go narrow and work your way in. Yeah, totally acceptable, okay? So again, it all becomes about what you want. And then like with the hands, okay? You can take the hands this way. You can take the hands this way. Personal recommendation is you never take the hands further than you can take your gaze, okay? Because we want to keep our body safe. And warrior two. You know, people will say, this way, right? Like, find homeostasis for you. Find what you naturally move into. Find stability. Find the stretch you want to get. Don't compromise your root. Keep it down. Keep those heels down. Keep lifting from within. Keep rooting down into the earth. And then make your assessment about whatever adjustments that you want. But different angles of different positions will give you different sensations and essentially a different workout, okay? This is different from 90 and from going past 90. These are all different ways to work the body. If I have my hips here versus here, that's going to change the way I work my back leg, my quadricep, and it's going to change the way my low back plays into effect as well. Is it tweaking it? Is it hurting it? Okay? So make these adjustments according to what feels good for you. There are shades of gray, and it's okay to work into them. All right, everybody, so we're going to move on to another common asana, all right, which is chair pose or utkatasana. Again, like I've practiced 20 years, so I'm going over the poses in my mind where like everyone has an opinion, right? We'll get to downward dog next. But chair position seems to be one of those poses. And so I just want to show you the shades of gray before I explain it, right? It could be anything from this to this. Now that's a lot of gray area, okay? It just depends on what you want to get out of it. If I want to work my quadriceps, I'm going to go lower, right? If I want to keep my heels down, or not keep my heels down, but if I want to work my Achilles, which I typically do as a practitioner, I actually go really low because this position here really makes me focus on rooting as I come in and out, right? So there's no way I can cheat that pose. But maybe your Achilles are fine. So you don't need to go that deep, right? You want to focus on something else. Maybe you want to focus on opening your heart, right? So I've been told by teachers, never send the knees past the toes. I've heard, totally send the knees past the toes. I've heard, tuck the pelvis, stick your butt out. Like I've heard so many different cues. Again, none are right, none are wrong. You have to ask yourself, what do I want to get out of this, right? So maybe when you get into these poses, you feel things out, you find that stability, and you get to know your body. And you're like, yeah, this is actually pretty simple. Maybe I could look up more and like really find lift here. Now I've just changed the pose. I've now taken something that wasn't really doing anything, and now I just made something out of it. Don't get so caught up in like pelvis tilted one way or another. Find what feels healthy to you. If a teacher tells you to tilt your pelvis in a direction and now your low back hurts, don't do it. Have enough respect for your body and enough say over your body to do what feels appropriate for your body, okay? Because a lot of us aren't able to tilt the pelvis at a certain angle without crunching. It's actually very advanced to tilt the pelvis and lift into the heart without compromising that low back. So maybe you don't, you keep it neutral instead. You just sit to where you can comfortably and move into position. Maybe you're like me and you want to really get those heels down better in your downward dog, right? So you use Utkatasana as an opportunity to find more length through the Achilles. So you go really low, right? This makes you work your bandhas too, right? Like this becomes a balancing position here. And it's really hard to take my arms up. It's like, oh, now I'm really challenging myself. So between going that deep or ending here, there's a lot of spaces in between. Pelvis tilted under, tilted out, like different ways you could actually change that. Do you want the weight more into the front of the foot, the back of the foot? Like, where do you want to take the work? Is essentially the whole point of this course. Where do you want to take the work, finding it in a healthy way, and maximizing the asanas, okay? So give yourself that permission to do that. Now we're going to move on to the downward dog, which is probably, one of the most beat up poses in the yoga system, because everyone has a way that they want to teach it or do it. So, downward dog position. Most schools kind of have this hip distance apart. It's a little bit wider, right? And you're somewhere hovering in between what feels good for you and what looks right for the teacher, but you're never really sure if you're doing it right. And maybe for some of you, you can be here. I can't actually go this wide and get my heels down. I have to take my feet in. Okay? Just like every other position, though, you want to work from the ground up. And downward dog is a resting pose, too, so keep that in mind. Are you resting in this pose? Because if you can't rest in it, you're going to need to change it. Now, I actually like to take my feet even further in, and I like to take them wide. Because this now gives me more room, right, to take my weight back. I don't have to compromise with my upper body anymore. All my weight can go back. And if I'm really tired, I can bend into it and take pretty much 80% of the weight out of my upper body, right? Because I'm not here anymore. I'm back here. You can see my hips shifting way back, right? And that comes by actually giving the body a shorter stance. If I have a longer stance, right, my upper body has to work much, much, much harder to keep my hips back because I can't leverage my heels down. If I can leverage my heels down, now I can access energy from the earth pulling up, and that will only aid pulling the hips back, okay? But I have to make that egoic compromise, right, of bringing the feet in and taking them out. Even bending the knees. But from here, it's really hard. Now, again, upper body. So some teachers will say elbows in, elbows out, shoulders here, shoulders there, chest up, chest back. All I'm going to tell you to do is find a nice, safe, comfortable downward dog. If you feel like you're overworking your upper body, shift the legs, okay? Because the legs are going to take 80% of the weight in the end. If your upper body is driving this pose, you will wear yourself out in practice. So if you can do a wide stance and have good support from the earth because your heels are on the ground, then great. But maybe you're like, I'm still not getting much out of this pose. Like I can rest in it and still achieve something. So that's when you might say to yourself, maybe I can adjust it a little bit. I've taken the weight out of my upper body, which is important, but you still want to find something a little bit more. Maybe it's the back of the legs. You want to stretch them more. Maybe you want to pull up on the quads. Maybe you want to find your bandhas in this pose, right? So one more time, I'm going to say this over and over again. Take the emphasis off how the pose is supposed to look and put the emphasis on what you want to find and what you want to feel. What kind of experience do you want to have, okay? For most of us, and I don't know all yoga systems, but downward dog is a resting pose. So you might want to find that ease and that stability alone, okay? If you're so caught up in how the arms are supposed to be, you're never going to be able to find that like, exhale relief in the pose. You're just going to be so caught up in trying to make sure it looks good, or your chest is right, or your trapezius is doing what it's supposed to, and you're not collapsing or whatever, right? Well, if you just find the earth with your heels, with your feet, and you send your hips back, you don't have to worry about hurting your upper body because you don't have weight there anymore, right? So if you just take the weight off of it, you don't have to worry about injuring it or doing it wrong, okay? I would say you don't want to be super wide, right? You want to try and pull it in, but the weight of the pose, the biggest part of it really needs to be hips back and rooted, okay? So we can rest. But it's your pose. So ask yourself, what do I want to get out of downward dog, okay? Is it a resting pose for me? If it's not, you might want to change it. You can go wide, you can go narrow, you can go short, you can go long, right? You can bend your elbows, you can straighten your elbows, you can take your heart forward, you can pull your heart back. Whatever you want to do to find what you need in that pose. All right? So no right or wrong. I think I got to a point maybe 10 years ago where I was just so tired of teachers just changing my downward dog. Like they were constantly trying to fix my downward dog. And all I wanted to do was rest in it, okay? So have the courage to take back that downward dog, make it a resting pose, get what you need out of it, and we'll move on with practice today. Okay, so now we're going to move on to some seated poses. Just a note about Paschimottanasana. Paschimottanasana is a very basic pose, right? Just a full forward fold. Oftentimes we think about going for length, and that's fine. That's what we want to do. We want to get length out of the pose. And a lot of teachers, they really try and always stretch you longer, longer, longer. And that's great, that's fine. Maybe you want to go for longer. Maybe you're here and you want to get all the way to here. And a lot of times teachers will emphasize that you want to bring, instead of the feet rolling in, you want to bring the feet out. And again, that's fine. But the Paschimottanasana that I want to talk about is the one that's just there to provide a little relief, okay? And if it's the end of your practice, and all you want to do is a nice counter pose to some back bends or whatever, you just want to reset your nervous system and calm yourself, you don't have to go full force. You don't have to always shoot for the end goal. You don't have to have the feet in perfect position and always have to lengthen. Sometimes all we want to do, right, and to get the most out of a pose is sometimes to get less out of a pose, is to just relax forward, right? Just provide your body the relief it needs to reset your low back, to reset your nervous system, to calm your senses, right? You don't have to always go for like the perfect stretch, okay? So I just want to throw that in there, that sometimes, what you need doesn't always come in a stretch. Sometimes it comes in relief. Sometimes it comes in, just finding, your center again, okay? So keep that in mind too when you're moving through your practice, that's equally as important as like, do I want to work my hip or my quad or whatever? Like we want to focus on the other things too, the more subtle, energetic things that bring us serenity, okay? So I also want to move into Marichyasana A, which is a really basic like forward fold where you bring the foot up, okay? So a lot of teachers, they teach that you have to be heel to sit bone in alignment. And for some of us, that's great, right? And then we go and we reach for the clasp here, okay? But to always have to go for this exact position might not be the best idea. So, maybe some people can't even go that far. Maybe they can only bring their foot in this amount. And that's totally fine. So you bring your foot as far as you can, and then you go for it, okay? And then over time, you find the clasp, okay? But you just focus on pushing through your foot, finding the foundation. It's so important to always have a firm root because you really cut yourself off from length and lift if you can't move from a point of opposition, okay? If I just haphazardly move into this, I'm not going to go as far as I would if I push through my foot and then use that to lengthen my torso forward, okay? So maybe you're not flexible enough to bring the foot all the way in and you have to bring the foot out here. Honor that, that's fine, that's where you work from. The other position is that maybe bringing it so far in, you're kind of off balance because you're so compact at this point. Like you need a little bit more space for pushing into the ground. So a lot of old school teachers teach to actually bring the heel outside the hip. This is a totally different stretch now. I'm working totally different muscles to hold the foot here, right? And so also from here, not only are you getting a different stretch, but now my torso, I have more space to move my chest through than if I were to keep it here, because now I have to work to the side to kind of get through, right? Whereas if my foot is out, I'm just already there, okay? So that's a different angle to work from as well. Now moving on to the clasp, right? Some people, they're tight and they have to just be about here. They can't really go any deeper. But if you can, eventually, you want to actually take the shoulder lower. Now, we're getting a deeper stretch. Now, we are finding more parts, right? Because this is only going to take us so far. But if we're really deep, now we're moving into more areas of the body, okay? Now, my hip, this bone here, right? You can focus on keeping the sit bone down, or you can allow it to come up. That's a personal preference point. If a teacher insists that it has to be on the ground at all times, that's a myth. It doesn't, okay? You want to keep this foot grounded for leverage, and then this other hip, the left side in this case, you want to keep that grounded. Now, eventually, yeah, if you want to work this right hip down, you're going to find a deep stretch throughout the lower side body here, okay? And that's great if that's what you want to find. But don't feel you have to keep this sit bone down for the purpose of alignment. If you're going to do it because you're looking for a certain stretch or a certain sensation in the body. It's much harder, though. If I keep my sit bone down, I can't go as far, okay, than if I lift it. So if I'm going for length in my torso, I might want to lift it, right, to get further. But if I'm going for more length in my side body, I might want to keep it rooted. Okay, so you see the difference in how subtle angles or shifts or placements of the foot can totally change the work that we find in a pose. And none of it's good or bad, none of it's right or wrong. It's just what you want to get out of the pose, okay? This is Ardha Matsyendrasana. So it's like in the second series of Ashtanga, and it's a twist. So, you know, I've heard teachers say the foot needs to be in line with the knee, right? And I've heard Sharat actually yell at me and say, nope, you need to bring it back, okay? Now, in the case of, you know, Sharat, I would just do whatever he says in front of him. But in the case of your own practice, obviously, find what you need, all right? So maybe we go someplace in between for the purpose of this course. Now, a lot of teachers also, they promote just total vertical lines. But if I do a total vertical twist, right, so that means that like my heart is coming back up, then I begin to uproot this hip. And if I'm trying to open this hip, I don't want to uproot it. I want to keep it firmly planted and work with it, right? So that I'm going to actually move into the hip instead of pulling it off the ground, okay? So you would actually work to leverage down and pull the head back in opposition, but you wouldn't take the hip off the ground to have that vertical line. So that's something to keep in mind, right? You know, your roots. And again, you never want to compromise your root for the pose. And then we also have, for example, that's why I like this pose. There's a lot of parts to it. You know, foot back, foot pointed, somewhere in between. Where's the foot, right? Do we want it really narrow in? Do we want it kind of wide? You know, these are all things to ask yourself when you're looking for space, when you're looking for foundation, when you're looking for length, when you're looking to twist. All of these things are going to be important when you decide the details of your own alignment, okay? And so, yeah, you definitely want to make sure that you honor your own body in that process. Some people might actually be able to pull into a really deep twist, right, vertically, without compromising the hip. But that's probably not the majority of us. So we're going to have to choose what we want to work on, okay? And, you know, whether or not the foot is here, this is one stretch. But if we take it back here, that's a completely different stretch. So you want to ask yourself, what do I want to get out of it, right? And move accordingly. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a back bend. We'll do camel or astrasana, because I think this one is really relevant. And there's a lot of, you know, bad cueing out there, right, that keeps you limited. And we want to break free of those limitations today and finding that gray. So typically in Ustrasana, the thing that most people say is hips forward, tailbone under. The problem with that cue is that most of us can't do that without crunching the low back. We don't really want to do that. So again, we're going to focus on our foundation. Now, if you can't get, so if you look at my shins here, if you can't get your shin to the ground, like you're tighter, like a lot of men tend to have the tight ankles, right? This is a struggle. Then I suggest that you go a little bit wider. So instead of being inner hip width apart, you're now outer hip width. So it's a little bit more here, right? Because if we can't stabilize through the leg, then we want to help the stability along as much as we can. And if we're too narrow, it can be hard to stabilize. We need to be a little bit wider. Right? Now from here, you might want to consider, like, again, you know, if you can push into those legs okay without causing stress. If you can't, then this might be where you want to stay. You want to just focus on that root, okay? We've gone a little bit wider to help it, but now we just want to focus on finding that base, all right? And then from that point, maybe you're able to push those hips forward and tuck that tailbone under. I can't do that without hurting my low back. And I know a lot of students who can't do that without hurting their low back. So I don't have them do that. I don't have them thrust, you know, like their Elvis with their pelvis, okay? I actually have them just push down, straight down, and lean back, okay? So instead of the pose being something like this, it turns into something more like this. So the whole side body will lean back as one unit instead of this, because that instantly goes into my low back. And I don't like that. So maybe you do like that. Maybe that's what you want for your practice, right? So you're going to just find that bend and go right for it. But if you want to prepare for deeper back bends, Ustrasana is a fabulous pose, because if you work it straight, now you can work your legs. And it's quite a leg workout. I don't even have to go all the way in it, but if I just lean back, my quads are getting a workout now, okay? So now I've accessed some work. Maybe this is where I want to stay, okay? Maybe I'm totally good to go back, so I lean all the way back, I find my heels, right? Maybe you just grab the heels. Maybe you bring the hands all the way down. Whatever you want to do. Now you have options. You can play with the shoulders. You can open them or keep it more narrow of a back bend, right? Head back, head forward, whatever. But I recommend playing with the pose to see what feels appropriate for you. You don't have to do the standard of, you know, this. Everyone does this. And I don't know when that started being taught, but it's really dangerous. Maybe you want to focus on just lifting through your heart instead and not going anywhere. So these are some of the things to watch out for when you're doing your back bends. All right, and now we'll move on to even the stance for drop backs, just because I think it's relevant to go over. All right, so to piggyback with the back bend process, I think it's really important to talk about not just the stance for Urdhva Dhanurasana, which is your basic wheel, but also for drop backs. Because if there's one thing I hear more often than not, it's that you have to have these parallel feet. And for an individual's anatomy, that couldn't be further from the truth, okay? I know I talked about this in my drop backs course, but here's the thing. Like, the way that the hip joint works for people is different. Therefore, the way that our legs open or close is going to be different. And what's natural for each of us is going to be different. So to tell students that they always have to have parallel feet when they do back bends or drop backs really sets most of us up for not just injury, but limitation in general, okay? So if I said, for example, that most people have a right-handed, like most people use their right hand to do things, but a certain percentage of the population uses their left, that's kind of similar to saying most people have externally rotated hips, but a certain percentage have internally rotated hips. So I'm not saying that these people don't exist, because they do, but the majority of us tend to just have more of an externally rotated hip, which means that for me, right, because I have externally rotated hips, for me to be standing neutral is actually to be standing with my legs slightly open. That's neutral for me, okay? The second I take my legs to parallel, I have now, for my body, moved internally. So I don't have to go to this extreme to be in an internal rotation. All I have to do is take my legs to parallel, and I'm moving internally, okay? Now, for the internal rotators, right, this is going to be neutral. But for most of us, this is going to be neutral. And a lot of times what happens is people go to do back bends, and they try so hard to keep this parallel that they really cut themselves off in the hip flexor from being able to gain length because they're working against their body. If my body is going to be neutral here, then I'm going to find a natural openness here by working with that opening of the feet, okay? But the second that I take them inside, I've now cut off the length between the hip flexor attachment from my knee into my pelvic area, okay? So I want to honor that and work with it, okay? So now that doesn't mean you have to go totally wide. You can. But the most important thing to remember when you're doing your drop backs or you're doing just basic wheel is that if your feet want to turn out, let them, because you're going to find more space that way. If you're always fixated on trying to keep them in, your back bend will never deepen, okay? I mean, if it does, it's very little, because all you're going to do is fight your body to keep those feet in, and you'll never be able to relax into your own natural foundation to be able to do the rest of the work. So stand natural when you go into a drop back. Prepare your feet in a natural position for even just your back bends. Allow that to happen because that's your body's natural opening. All right, that's an easy access that we want to work with. Now, obviously, we never want to dump into the low back, but the other thing that I always hear is tuck your tailbone under, tuck your tailbone under, tuck your tailbone under. Well, if we're constantly tucking that tailbone, then we're cramping that low back. And you don't want to cramp your low back. If anything, you just want to think neutral. Just keep your pelvis neutral. You don't want to push it out. You don't want to push it back in too much. You just want it at neutral, and you want to take the bend up the spine into the heart area, okay? But for the purpose of back bends in this talk right now, I want to just state that the position of the feet is very much specific to your own anatomy, and you need to honor that if you're ever going to have healthy back bends and really deep back bends. If your legs want to open, allow that. If you happen to be one of those practitioners with internal rotation from the hip joint, fabulous. You know, you have other things to work on, trust me. But, you know, if you're not, don't beat yourself up over it. Allow your body's natural alignment to move forward and work with it, okay? So if the feet want to come out when you're doing a back bend, know that that's natural for you and work with it, okay? All the other basics are going to stay the same. You're going to use your legs to engage, keep the pelvis neutral, and move into the heart area. But honor where the feet want to go. Don't try to change it. Don't try to demand that they go parallel, okay? If you're a very advanced practitioner and you want to work it and you want to change it maybe after you've really mastered the depths of your back bend, that's up to you. But in the process of learning how to cultivate space in your back bend, you don't want to work against yourself. You want to work with your body. Okay, so I want to play with a few arm balances because I want to show that, you know, really, you know, your personal alignment is not something that is only applicable to certain poses, right? Like, even in the arm balances, we can find that this becomes an issue, okay? So as an advanced practitioner in the Ashtanga system, third series, right, we do a lot of arm balances. And so if we were to do, you know, just this side plank here, right? There's a lot of different ways to do it. We come into it this way. But, you know, there's a lot of theory. Like, are we on the side of the foot? Is the foot pushing down? And then from there, like, do we take the foot in? Do we pull the foot out? What do we do? Well, once again, I'm going to say that's up to you, okay? If you feel that you can do this pose perfectly balanced on the side of the foot, then you can work from there. I personally like to have my whole foot on the ground. So I work from having the whole foot on the ground. And I work up, okay? So that means that, like, I move from a balanced place all the way up. I don't get into the pose and then find balance. I find balance first. Okay, so I'm going to push through my foot, bend my knee a little bit, catch my toe, and move into it. Now from here, you can take the foot more forward. You can take the foot more up. You can take it more back. Okay? But that becomes personal preference, right? If I push down through my heel, I'm going to work my hip more. If I kind of sag low, I'm not going to work my hip as much, right? Because I'm going to be engaging from my gluteus down into my heel to keep that foundation. But maybe I don't want to do that, right? And even with the arm, I could move my balance this way. I could move it this way, okay? Ideally, you want to be somewhere where you're stacked only for the purpose of stability and not injuring yourself. If you were going to take it any way, I would take it this way versus moving too far, okay? So if I'm in it, right, this, straight up, or even here, right? Different angles of the arm are all applicable. It just depends on what you want to get out of it, okay? So moving on, we could move into another arm balance to demonstrate this principle. So we could do, you know, Galavasana, Ekapada Galavasana, right? Or even Bakasana. But let's do Galavasana, okay? So Galavasana is where one leg is going to be lengthened out and the other leg is actually going to be in. Okay? Now, from here, I could actually go really low, right? Sinking in and just focusing on balance. Once I have that balance, I could focus on taking my arms straighter. My leg could be low, my leg could be high. None of these are like right or wrong. It's all just where you want to work. If I'm in the pose and I'm comfortable, maybe I could focus on bringing my leg higher. Maybe I could focus on bringing my chest through. Maybe I could focus on straightening my arms, right? So there's different ways to approach all of the asanas and to find what you want or what you need to get what you need, and all of them. There's no right and there's no wrong. It's just totally where you want to find the work, okay? Again, I really encourage you to take your practice into your own hands once you have a good general foundation of asana and figure out what feels appropriate for you. Move away from the guidelines of what others have taught you to be right or wrong, black or white, to discover your own gray areas, especially because life's going to change on you. And so your body's going to go through changes. If you're a woman, you might get pregnant, right? You might deal with some illness. You might not be able to practice for a while, so when you come back, you're weaker. Maybe you find that you're more open and the old rules just don't apply. So you have to honor the changes in your body and know that, like, with different cycles and different seasons, you're going to also have different needs that you're going to discover. So you're going to be stepping out of the lines that were once created for you, and you're going to have to explore that terrain. And I realize that that's a little bit vulnerable in the beginning, right? Because you want someone to tell you what's right and what's wrong. But as you progress in your own practice, I think you'll find that it's actually a little bit more liberating to go where your body needs you at that time. And just, you know, even if it's a contractual place, even if you end up backstepping, right? Modifications are also a way to find what you need and to honor that if you can't go the full length that you've always gone or whatever. So try not to think about how you think it should look. Try to drop that mentality altogether and think about what you need. Practice is yours, you know, and enjoy it. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this course. I hope it made sense to you. There's lots of asanas that I could play with, but I didn't want to keep you guys forever. I just wanted to give you a taste of what it's like to kind of explore the gray a little bit. You know, you can change your hand positions a little bit. If you injure your wrist, you might have to move your hand a degree. If you injure your knee, you might have to change the rotation of your leg for a while. But honor these changes and have the freedom to move through the ebbs and flows of your practice the way that your body needs you to. All right? So have a good one, guys.